Ladies and gents, home UX, and this is shocking Russian military corruption exposed by the channel Task and Purpose. Yeah, so the Chinese corruption video from Task and Purpose. Apparently, there's a Russian one as well. I don't think I found any other one, so there's only two: Russian and Chinese corruption. Okay, so this is going to be interesting. This is probably post-war, Ukraine-Russia war, and I'm pretty sure there was like certain documents were leaked or something like that. Basically implied that Putin didn't know what was happening and people were just being yes men or something, as far as I remember. I'm pretty sure that's something that like that is going to be covered here, but I don't know. Task and Purpose is a great channel about geopolitics, military, anything military related. I like how he covers things relatively quick. So even if you like follow Task and Purpose, you'll probably be up to date with what's happening around the world, military wise. So yeah, this is going to be awesome. That's what it. Remember, we'll flag my next and subscribe, so that way I know which type of videos to react to more. You can really help the channel by helping the algorithm and things. Try to react to many different type of videos, and YouTube goes crazy sometime. If I put like too many video game reactions, like then military reactions will be like impression of that will go down. People won't get recommended or something like that. So by hitting like and commenting or whatever, you can really help this channel out. And comment down if you if you have any problem with any type of setup, like does this sound good, does this mic sound good? If it doesn't, I'll try to make sure that I react from studio more than this. But yeah, that's what it is.
Hello and welcome to my mega yacht. A lot of people ask me, Dmitry, how you afford such opulence? I tell them the same thing. Definitely not from selling army supplies and fuel on the side.
Russia spent nearly $66 billion on their military in 2021. That's the fifth most in the entire world. They claim to have the largest military with over 1 million active duty personnel, and many sources claim that they have 12,000 main battle tanks, 3,000 pieces of artillery. So why is the Russian military still struggling against little old Ukraine, a nation that spent just $5.4 billion on their military in 2021?
The campaign of Putin's has exposed the Russian military's corruption and overall lack of effectiveness.
What happened? Was the money all siphoned off in corrupt deals by people connected to the military?
That is ridiculous. Who said that? Who told you that?
He claimed money that was intended to modernize Russia's military was actually stolen and then spent on mega yachts.
Now I know I probably sound crazy, but this isn't some conspiracy. I've connected all of the dots. This goes all the way to the top, people. This really should be an iceberg video because this fraud gets progressively worse and weirder.
Well, I want to make the argument to you that it largely has to do with corruption. But I'm not just talking about theft. I'm going to outline how a whole system of dishonor ended up tricking a lot of military analysts, including myself, into thinking the Russian military was more powerful than it was. Look, even those Russian manpower numbers are inflated because officers at every level, from company commanders to high-up generals, have an incentive to claim that they have more personnel and equipment than they really do, so they can increase their budget allocations for troops that don't exist, and then pocket and steal that extra money. In this way, the number of troops and equipment reported can be vastly inflated. But how deep does this culture of corruption in the Russian Ministry of Defense go? Exactly how much is it responsible for hampering their war efforts? What specific instances do we know about? And why did the Russian government give me $10 million to make this video while our special effects still look like this? This FII report, titled Russian Military Corruption Scale and Causes from 2005 by the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment, is an exhaustive document that has actual hard numbers illustrating Russian corruption. The FFI report states that between 1991 and 2001, Russian auditors uncovered armed forces corruption totaling 350 billion rubles, or 11.5 billion USD. So what that means is over 10 years of defense spending, about a tenth of the budget was lost to known cases of corruption. In January 2004, Russian auditor named Sergei Stefan discovered the true scope of the problem of maintenance of their vehicles when they found out that 14 billion rubles were not spent according to the maintenance plan. 38% of all military crimes prosecuted in the first quarter of 2004 in Russia were embezzlement, theft, and fraud related. That tells us just how deep the rate of corruption in the Russian military was at that time. The Norwegian analysts were able to then create a table based on those figures that could estimate the potential amounts that the Russian military budget had wasted on corruption. If, let's say, 1 in 50 officers embezzled the average amount of 1 billion rubles, then 3% of the budget was wasted. If 1 in 5 officers embezzled at the average rate, the losses to Russian defense budget would be 33%. The problem here is determining how many corrupt officers there exactly were in the Russian military. The FFI report suggests it's likely a 16% budget loss. But remember, those numbers are from 2005, and it's likely much worse today.
Before we continue, does anyone need to purchase 40,000 pairs of these? You had them laying around.
Highlights from the rest include data on
Okay, seriously, man, damn. Okay, this is basically stealing from Putin, isn't it? Like, Putin basically sets the budget, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, we have way too many troops, we need budget. Turns out they don't have that much troops. Now, with the Putin's, let's just say, image, I'm surprised anybody would try to steal from him, or like, try to, take money from him by lying, right? So that's a surprise. Like, wouldn't Putin just basically, like, make them disappear? Isn't there a risk of something like that? So I'm surprised people would take chance like that, because Putin always had this image of like, don't fuck with me, right? Even like the big names like were afraid of him in his own like mercenaries and generals and things like that. So a lot of people corrupt being like this, like, yeah, that's a surprise.
how Russian officers and lower enlisted privates sold weapons to their own enemies in Chechnya, the Chechen resistance. The fact that those crimes are low risk, high reward at the individual, institutional, and political level, so soldiers were rarely prosecuted or got in trouble for any corruption.
But wait a second, where did all of this start in the first place?
Corruption is defined as the misuse of public power for private gain, and the practice has been a tradition long before the modern Russian army. After the fall of the USSR, the Russian Federation cut military spending drastically, and weapons production fell by 50%. Factories shut down, arms manufacturers were consolidated, and defense industries which were once controlled and operated by the state were being privatized. Who then got control of this valuable defense industry? Well, they were handed over to the Russian oligarchs. Russia didn't go from communism to capitalism, it skipped a step and went straight to oligarchy ruled by the rich. Particularly, it was the oligarchs who were friendly with Russian President Boris Yeltsin in the 1990s. Putin had promised to check the power of the oligarchs when he ran for president in 2000. But what he really did was, according to many authors, commentators, and the World Peace Foundation, is establish a kleptocracy, where the personal enrichment of the ruling elite is the primary goal of regime policy.
Now I know what you're thinking. Isn't the US military just as corrupt? Isn't it hypocritical to only talk about Russian corruption?
Listen, I know for a fact the US military had a ton of waste in Iraq. We would go on missions to deliver bags filled with hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash to local sheikhs, leaders, so they would pocket most of it and give a little bit to the people in his village so they wouldn't attack us. They were basically being paid off.
These farming and infrastructure grants that I handed out often went straight to the enemy. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of the amount of waste that the United States DoD admittedly has each year.
But the main difference between the US military corruption and Russian corruption is whenever that kind of theft or embezzlement was caught in the US, they would go to great lengths to prevent it. I spent 4 days at one of Saddam's former high-up generals' palaces in Baghdad. This place was truly a mansion, dozens of rooms. It had gold-plated Olympic pools, diving boards. It wasn't that Saddam had no idea his generals were corrupt. This wasn't his generals stealing from him. This was the system working as it was intended. I bring this up because I think this is exactly what happened in the case of Sergei Shoigu, Russia's Minister of Defense, who lives in an $18 million mansion while on a government salary with a declared income of considerably less at $2.6 million. The really ironic part with Sergei was that he was put into power in 2012 after his predecessor was fired for corruption.
Wake of a current crackdown on corruption in Russia within the country's military, with the defense minister and chief of general staff replaced earlier this week.
But wait, is that actually a surprise? It might be more likely that the Russian government used
Right, get the point that, okay, so in this case, Putin probably is like, Putin's worth is like in billions. Like, how does that happen? So obviously he's corrupt as well, that's the point. So he would expect his people to be corrupt as well. But is this the same? Is this the same as like those Iraq things? Because those Iraq things is like unstable governments and things like that, right? Somebody coming in power, trying to keep his people happy as well, just like him. In Russia is different. Putin literally acted like a monarch in a way, a dictator, right? With a, I don't know, just massive government, right? Supposedly second most powerful military with that kind of big budget. Putin was the last word, right? With all election and all that like formalities, in the end Putin was it, right? So obviously Putin pocketing money, but he would not expect that, at least not from like lower ranks, like okay, top generals maybe, and Putin might be in on it, sure. But this level of corruption everywhere, and not just corruption, okay, Putin might pocket them money, okay, so but at least numbers won't lie. This is numbers lying, which means they lied to Putin, right? They basically, oh, Putin, this is how many troops we have. No, you don't. So that's basically lying to Putin, isn't it? So that's a risky thing.
Corruption as an excuse to get rid of him. They knew that he was corrupt, but once they wanted to get rid of him for a different reason, that's how they pulled the trigger. This line comes from the FFI report as evidence. An explanation of the Kremlin's lack of prosecuting corruption is because this kind of crime benefits them because it gives them leverage over their generals. At any time, they can step in and act upon the blatant corruption as an excuse to remove them. It gives leadership influence over state officials and the ability to dismiss them. That gives generals who are aware of this reality a very strong incentive to stay loyal to the Kremlin and by extension Putin. Further evidence of this comes from Putin's own former anti-corruption advisor, George Satarov, who said, quote, "The scale of army corruption has never been studied since the defense ministry remains one of the least transparent of the ministries. They don't look into it because they don't want to. I think Putin was looking the other way to a certain degree, but miscalculated how bad the corruption was."
And even in spite of all of this waste, the Russian military might still find a way to win. After their initial setbacks in the beginning of the war, they're starting to have some more success.
Vitaly Namkamov, who studies organized crime, has argued that corruption has a social role in Russia.
Look, man, in the end, I don't see Russia losing, right? I get it. Every time I talk about, there is always comment like, "Oh, Russia losing this and that." Okay, in a childish way, sure. But let's think about it honestly. Okay, Russia's losing. Okay, Russia took a lot of mistakes. Are we really seeing Russia losing against Ukraine? Western countries are not getting involved. They're giving support to it, sure. But is support equipment just enough to give Ukraine power, right? Ukraine can't fly Western jets. They need to be trained for it and all that, right? Okay, Russia is hitting setbacks for how long? Basically, this is like inevitable, right? So I don't see Russia losing in long term. In the end, when everything goes down, like dust settles, Russia's probably going to win in some form. I don't see Russia not. That's just realistic, let's be honest. But the point is like how badly they are going to like stagnate the way they are. Like, it should be like how fast they win. They didn't win fast. Okay, now how late is going to be. That's the case.
And apparently it's a commonly held opinion that a certain amount of corruption is necessary for the wheels to go round in Russia.
Can we actually quantify how all of this translates to affecting the average Russian soldier on the ground?
So there was a lot of straight up lying going on, but sometimes Russia's Ministry of Defense would pay for products or technologies that they really needed, and they would still get ripped off. In these instances, the military doesn't just lose money, it loses the advantage on the battlefield. So with UAVs and drones back in 2010, the editor-in-chief of Russia's journal National Defense posted that approximately 5 billion rubles meant to go towards the manufacturing of UAVs were wasted on kickbacks within the corrupt Ministry of Defense. The cost of building drones at home was more expensive from the start because the cost of the kickbacks was baked into the cost of the drones. So the drones were expensive to make and hard to produce, so Russia ended up buying drones from Israel instead. Now, 12 years later, the British Defense Ministry is reporting that Russia is likely facing a shortage of UAVs in the war in Ukraine, particularly due to a lack of domestic manufacturing capabilities. This is an example of how yesterday's corruption affects today's battlefield. So I've been trying to figure out why there's such a lack of night vision goggles in the Russian military.
All right, guys, sun's going down. Take out your nods, get your night vision out, and let's get ready for this mission. What do you mean we don't have any night vision? Whose job was it to get the night vision? This was not on me. We could share this flashlight. That could work.
A Ratnik program was supposed to get everyone all this night vision goggles. So it turns out one of the key components in night vision goggles is a special sensor that only a select few countries are able to manufacture. Russia's Deputy Prime Minister, Dmitry, promised in 2012 that within a year, Russia would be manufacturing its own sensors and as a result, its own night vision goggles. A year later, a company whose name translates simply to photoelectronic devices, the company was owned 50-50 by a state scientific company called Cyclone and an offshore company in Cyprus. Rayfast was owned by a Panamanian company called Bluebell Investments, which turns out it was related to a rich businessman named Konstantin Nikolaev. Confused yet? Buckle up.
People, we're about to go through the looking glass here, all the way down the rabbit hole, and uncover the conspiracy as to why no Russian soldiers have any night vision.
Rayfast was split up in a way that gave half of its stakes to photoelectronic devices, and then the other half to a Panamanian company called Baron Commercial, which means Baron Commercial now owned 25% of photoelectronic devices. And who owned Baron Commercial? The sons of two high-ranking Russian officials. One was the son of a director at Cyclone, and the other the son of a military general. Long story short, Rayfast Investments sold their stake to the two boys in Baron Commercial for dirt cheap, and the Baron boys sold that part of the company to another party for 570 times the price. They pocketed 200 million rubles for next to nothing. By 2016, the son of a general owned half of the photoelectronic devices, which received a loan for over 2.3 billion rubles to manufacture the special sensors used in night vision goggles. In 2018, when the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, wrote about the spider web of corruption, photoelectronic devices had received a second substantial loan from the Ministry of Defense, but still hadn't manufactured the sensors necessary to manufacture the night vision goggles. So that puts to bed the question of why all the Russian forces are supposed to have night vision goggles from the Ratnik program, but none of them have them because there's giant corruption going on. And night vision goggles is no small matter. Without it, you're at a huge disadvantage. You can't go into a modern war without night vision goggles. The Ratnik program that we've talked about on here before was reported to have delivered 200,000 sets by 2017, but apparently that never really happened.
Okay, seriously, even if Putin looked the other way, thinking like, fuck it, I don't care, this war basically bite him in the ass, right? Bit him in the ass, basically. So now he must be pissed. So people like those two boys and whatever, like, who profited the money and didn't do shit, what is happening to them now? Where are they? What about their whereabouts? Because I don't know, like, I feel like too many people are gonna disappear now. Because Putin must be pissed, like, okay, it's like, let go of a lot of this shit, but it really bit me in the ass. Because in the end, this war is like, a global stage, I'm like, my whole reputation is tarnished now. I can't flex anymore, right? I could have flexed if like all this corruption didn't happen and I got the shit that I wanted with a minor corruption, but no, they went too ballistic, basically.
This Russian blogger outlines how all of those granite plates that cost 10,000 rubles each were stolen from warehouses. Some Russian military leaders estimate that 20 to 40% of Russia's military budget got stolen every year. Former Russian Foreign Minister Andrei Krevnev recently tweeted that in the last 20 years of Russia trying to modernize the military, quote, much of the budget was stolen and spent on mega yachts in Cyprus. So how does this money get stolen? Sometimes a company has a monopoly or a product or service, so they get the prices too high from the get-go. Other times a company gets paid to do something it can't do, and other times the company barely existed in the first place. These non-existent companies are called shell companies. And you can run one too with just a mailing address and the willingness to do nothing at all. I'm perfect for it! The most notorious shell company CEO is the billionaire restaurateur Yevgeny Prigozhin did what a lot of Russian powerful people do to defraud the government. He set up shell companies and won bids to provide services for the military. Through his various companies, he won bids worth more than $394 million to manage all of these military cities. A journalistic investigation revealed that these bids, in addition to others, were in violation of anti-monopoly regulations. The investigators revealed that 5 of the companies that won the bids were established in the span of just a few weeks, just 1 month before the Minister of Defense put in orders for the services needed. On top of that, the CEO of 5 of these companies were former police officers with no experience in the business that they were now running. These fake companies were supposed to provide heat, housing, food, and water for the troops. It's no wonder why some Russian soldiers have claimed that the housing and food in the Russian military are worse than in Russian prisons. A video recently circulated online of Ukrainian soldiers who captured Russian military rations that expired in 2015. The New York Times recently reported that Russia has been asking China for MREs, or meals ready to eat, for their military. This isn't
authoritarian regime with corruption, basically encourage corruption with no regulation, no shit, right? The people and soldiers' life is gonna be like troublesome. That is horrendous.
Something you'd expect to fall behind on just a few months into a war that your country started. So why would the government allow this to happen? Well, there's a slim chance They just don't know what Pergniov was up to. But it's worth noting that Yevgeny Pergniov also runs PMC Wagner, a private military company that is said to handle some of Russia's more shadowy military affairs. Could Putin be giving these fake companies huge contracts as a way to have the state officially pay for the unofficial business handled by PMC Wagner? Well, maybe, but the question remains. Why would a country do this at the expense of their own soldiers? There have been reports of Russian soldiers in Ukraine sharing raincoats, going out without warm clothes, complaining about not eating.
I guess at least we know like why his disagreement with Putin near mutiny and his sudden plane crash. Why all that happened? Because Putin probably got pissed off over all of this.
Eating regularly for spans of 3 to 4 days. So we talked about maintenance, night vision, fuel. Theft of fuel has been an ongoing problem for the Russian military, and everyone from top military officials to everyday soldiers are stealing and selling military fuel. Colonel Valery Konopatov, one of the heads of the fuel and lubricant services, was arrested on suspicion of stealing 87 million rubles or $1.5 million worth of fuel from the Ministry of Defense. Russian soldiers have reported that they've shown up to do military exercises and found they couldn't perform these exercises because their vehicles were out of fuel. Aside from the stolen fuel, the soldiers were robbed of their training, which can be useful once your country goes to war. 2 soldiers were accused and convicted of stealing 16 tons of diesel fuel from the tanks of military vehicles. The Russian Ministry of Defense has invested in ways to monitor fuel within the military to cut down on fuel thefts. You're probably asking yourself, if corruption is such a huge, widespread problem in the Russian military, then why haven't they done more to fight it? Well, they have tried a few things, but the culture of corruption always seems to find a way. For instance, the Ministry of Defense instituted a 20-to-1 policy to control the ridiculous rise in prices in the defense industry. This meant that a company working with the military could add no more than 20% of profits to the cost. To put it simply, they tried to make a rule where companies couldn't charge the state more than 20% of what the product cost to make. Russian arms dealers found their way around this by dividing their workshops into separate legal entities. So instead of being a workshop that manufactured guns, for instance, they became 5 separate workshops that manufactured gun barrels, scopes, stocks, triggers, etc., so they could keep raising their profit margins by 20% at each stage of production. Putin has cracked the anti-corruption whip from time to time, but not in the way you probably think. The most famous example of corruption and scandal in Russia's military surrounded Anatoly Servanavkyov, Russia's defense minister from 2007 to 2012. So he substantially reorganized and reformed the military by consolidating it, but he was also described by one senior Russian official as the type of person who would steal everything that wasn't nailed down. He lost his job in 2012 when the head of his Department of Property Relations, this girl, defrauded the Russian government by selling off state property at dirt cheap prices in exchange for over $50 million in kickbacks. Not only was Serdyukov a party to the crime, but when Russian officials raided Vyacheslavy's luxury apartment, they found Serdyukov with her in the apartment wearing nothing but a bathrobe. However, some suspect that Serdyukov's firing and public humiliation may have had less to do with his corruption and more to do with his recent divorce from the daughter of Viktor Sobkov, one of Putin's.
How the fuck you're supposed to win a war when there's like a soap drama going on in the fucking background? All those soldiers are butt naked there with no night vision, not even a fucking robe. Conditions are worse than the fucking jail. And like all this drama is going in the background and all the money is being lost. Imagine that, like, oh my god, gunfire is happening, we are dying. It's like all like fucking Call of Duty style, like Saving Private Ryan type of scenario. Meanwhile, and there's some kind of like a Spanish soap opera is going on in the background. What is it called, right? I forgot what is it, Mexico? What is it like? You know that kind of space, it's not space, Spanish soap opera. I'm pretty sure that's the thing. Conan made an episode about that. But basically that's going on with the drama and shit. This is insanity. How the fuck you supposed to win a war when this is the thing? I thought Putin would be more like, like with a iron fist. He would have ruled like that, but that's not the case here.
Closest associates. This is an example of how even anti-corruption measures are used by Putin to keep corrupt officials in line. Again, if everyone in the government is corrupt, then anyone can be exposed and punished under the guise of anti-corruption when it serves the purposes of Putin and his regime. But in hindsight, none of this should have been a surprise to me. All of the breadcrumbs were already there. In 2006, this article was published by George Katz, and it outlines how corruption wasn't just at the highest levels, it was also at your lowest levels of your regular infantrymen. Young conscripts would have their money stolen from them while they earn just $3 a month. Affluent families are able to avoid the draft with hefty bribes to recruitment officers in exchange for being labeled as unfit for service. How could the Minister of Defense get scammed so badly, so many times over, by companies that can't do what they've been contracted to do? Who's signing these contracts? Why aren't they smarter? The answer, of course, is that the people on both sides of these contracts are most likely benefiting from the deal, meaning that the people of the Ministry of Defense are fully aware of and taking part in the corruption. Very profitable behavior. The irony in all of this is that even though Putin is the one who set this corrupt system up, he ultimately isn't immune to the corruption himself. Most people suspect that Putin probably honestly believed that the war in Ukraine would be over in the span of a weekend, but because of dishonesty and corruption.
Exactly. That Iraq example, okay, that makes sense because he's just gonna stay there, get fat with all the profit and corruption. Not if you want to do something with it, like invade another country and flex your power. At that point, this sort of corruption doesn't work, clearly. So I'm guessing Putin definitely didn't know. He didn't know, okay, there is corruption. He didn't know at what level. This is insanity. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are gonna get disappear soon.
He didn't know what he didn't know. And nobody around him wanted to tell him that at least some parts of his military were built on corrupt foundations. Part of what makes a culture of corruption sustain itself is endless lies, and no one taking responsibility for anything. Putin got nothing but good news until the bad news was staring him straight in the face. In 2019, the press got word of a prosecutor general's report that asserted that 1.6 billion rubles were stolen from enterprises within Russia's space and defense industries. Acknowledging this theft would be the first logical step in setting up measures to curb corruption. However, when it came time for the Ministry of Defense to publish this report, these specific allegations were not included. It seems pretty obvious that these comments were edited out because they expose corruption within the Ministry of Defense itself. Why would they tell on themselves? Corruption on that grand of a scale takes participation from both the parties stealing the money and the party allowing the money to be stolen. Therein lies the problem. A corrupt system won't tell on itself. And that brings us to our latest example of corruption within the Russian Ministry of Defense. Theft was recently revealed in the 46th Central Research Institute of the Ministry of Defense. Its leaders are accused of fraud as a part of an organized criminal group to the tune of 250 million rubles. The irony here is the 46th Center Research Institute has the main task of developing and improving Russia's armament programs. In other words, the current state armament program that lasts until 2027, worth more than 19 trillion rubles, was itself developed by plunderers. The corruption never ends. And the Russian soldiers in the foxholes are the ones who often pay the price of their corrupt and inept military infrastructure. One soldier talking to the media lamented his experience in the Russian military by remembering an old Soviet joke about a soldier asking to watch TV. You can watch it, but don't turn it on.
Hey, spare parts.
You can watch it, but don't turn it on. That's so perfect. Oh my god, that is so true. This is Russian soldiers are the one who always get screwed, right? Even in world wars, they died in millions. Literally, putting the ratio of male female just all wonky. And now, okay, with all this corruption, these are the people dying on the fucking battlefield. The people who don't even want to fight. Average people don't even want to fight, right? And these assholes with the corruptions are the one. This is the reason why they're fighting, right? This is people don't care. That's the thing, right? It's when your whole country is built on dictatorship, obviously encourage corruption. There is no regulation. If there is no regulation, who's gonna stop who? Why would anyone care? Okay, I could care about these people. What if they died? Or I could get a yacht, and these assholes are gonna choose yacht every single time. So there you go. All the people are getting screwed over in this war. Ukrainians are getting screwed, obviously. Russian soldiers who don't want to fight with no equipment are also getting screwed. The war is just stretching out. Too many people are dying. This is insanity. Right, well, that was shocking Russian military corruption exposed by John Task and Purpose. If you like my next video, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.